On this episode of Impact Fast, I had the honour of sitting down with Paul Biggar, the founder of Tech Palestine, to dive into the world of tech advocacy. This conversation will reshape how you view innovation and challenge you to consider why it should matter to founders and change makers alike. Paul leads a largely volunteer-driven organisation which comes with its own unique set of challenges. Yet he's harnessed the diverse skill sets of individuals and shared ecosystems to create an incredibly transformative incubator. In a remarkably short space of time, Tech for Palestine has scaled globally impactful movements, proving the power of collective action. During our discussion, Paul shared eye-opening insights into big tech's dark side, how their involvement alongside large private equity firms has fueled wars and stifled social reforms. He emphasized the cost of ignoring impact and challenged founders to confront the collateral damage of their work, ensuring their solutions don't inadvertently become part of the problem. One key takeaway: protest tech is the next frontier in innovation. It has the potential to educate communities beyond the spin of mainstream media, equipping them with tools to resist authoritarianism and push back against corporate greed. This isn't tech for profit, it's tech for people. So what's your take? Can tech truly be a force for justice? Tune in to hear Paul's powerful perspective and join the conversation. Let's rethink the role of innovation, building a more just and equitable world. Paul, I want to talk a little bit about the beginning. So you co-founded Circle CI in 2011. I want to learn a little bit more about Circle CI and the work that you did there, your startup journey in the tech world through Circle CI. And I'm particularly interested to hear about any challenges that you faced to roll out your product offering and how you took those lessons learned to find success in designing and rolling out Tech for Palestine.
Sure. So, I basically did my entire career in tech as a tech founder. Circle CI was actually my third startup. I did two before that. One where I sort of left early, and one where we shut it down within less than a year. And the so Circle CI was the first time it really started working. And that is just a complete roller coaster. Like raising money, getting customers, getting revenue, hiring people. You always have to hire faster than you really have money for, because you want to grow at that rate, or your investors want you to grow at that rate. And that's sort of the entire Silicon Valley game, to just like keep growing as fast as possible. And so it's constantly you're in this state of like almost constant terror, where are we going to have money 6 months from now to be able to pay salaries, or are we going to shut the entire thing down? And that's it is definitely an education. So I think startups, overall are incredible education in how to sort of, do things quickly, how to like manage the resources that you have versus the resources that you might have or that you intend to have in a couple of months or a couple of years, and sort of planning for the future while also, planning for tomorrow. I think it was really an incredible education on on how to get shit done, how to build things. That was incredibly valuable for Tech for Palestine. Tech for Palestine, we're constantly, we're almost doing new product lines every couple of months. We started with, we don't know what. Then we had the Tech for Palestine incubator. Now we've got Entrepreneurs for Palestine. We've got a volunteer thing. We've got we're doing fundraising at the moment. We've got said Entrepreneurs for Palestine. Oh, we're building a venture capital fund. It's like we're just going in a lot of new directions, and we're needing to scale to do it. And scaling with volunteers is honestly quite different than scaling with paid employees. So that's another that's a new angle with doing the nonprofit work. But fundamentally, it's a lot of the same game, and a lot of the lessons I took from Circle CI are very applicable here.
Did you start with a blank sheet of paper with Tech for Palestine? You just wanted to use your knowledge and contacts within the industry to do something good and had the idea in mind and then just build on it. And how much of that was planned and how much of it has been organic, would you say?
So it's very iterative, or organic, I would say. At the start, it started with this blog post that I wrote. And when I wrote the blog post, I didn't think anything would come of it. I honestly didn't think anyone would read the blog post. Because it's 2024, or it was 2024, and it was 2023 at the time. And it's just like, not, I feel blogs weren't even really a thing anymore, right? Like, people didn't really do that. So it felt almost silly to be writing it, but it turned out that it led to a lot of people reaching out, and so that was very organic. And then from there, it's like, okay, well, there's 40 people who've reached out to me. Let's get in a Discord channel and see what comes of it. And we were having meetings, and then we talked about opening up to the public, and then 1,000 people joined the first day that we opened it to the public. 2,000 joined that first week, and so it was like a really crazy. It was that sort of like startup energy again. We have all these, let's call them customers, right? They're volunteers. How do we satisfy the customers? How do we do the things? What even is this thing? So early on, I think we had a lot of plans, and like, planning is super helpful, but it never goes according to plan, even though but it is still super helpful to make these plans or to have these visions, but you have to iterate and you have to learn, and that's sort of like the startup thing. And I feel that a lot of what Tech for Palestine is sort of the startup experience and iteration, and I'm going to use words like minimal viable product and product market fit, which are kind of startup-y terms. Applying those to advocacy groups, to activism, and so for us, it has just been, I would say, almost entirely organic. We look at where we are now, what problems do we have, we try to address them, we iterate, we abandon things that aren't working, and the time from when we started to when we turned into an incubator. So we started in January. We started the incubator in April, so that was really pretty quick. And maybe in August we realized, okay, the incubator is the thing. So that was pretty quick turnaround on the thing, and it was all just figuring out where we are and figuring out how it all sort of works together. But there is planning the whole way. We have visions for how things work together, how I hate this word, synergies, how thing we're doing over here is really helpful to the thing we're doing over here, and that will also be really helpful to the thing that we're planning to do in 3 months or 6 months. But those don't always work out, but it's really good to sort of have that vision, and if it does work out, then it's then everything works well together, and if it doesn't, then you have new things to figure out.
Yeah, and I think it makes sense that you have structure and foundations and frameworks, and you use everything that you've learned from the business's perspective that you've ran, but also have on the other side the flexibility of responding to the market and the issues that come up. And I think, it's that balance, isn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned about working with volunteers, which I think is really interesting. I imagine the energy and the dynamic is different. And
we have a pretty big volunteer community. We've about 2,500 people in our volunteer database.
wow.
And so we have an entire volunteering team that spends a lot of time connecting the right people to the right projects, and we're building software to help with it. And it's just kind of like, it just can be extremely frustrating when people put hours and hours to get a volunteer into a project, and then the volunteer is like, actually, this is more work than I actually really had time for. It's like, you could have told us that in advance.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah,
and people go in with all the best will in the world, but sometimes it does sort of, as you said, life gets in the way, and perhaps they'd been going through a period where they had less work to do, and then all of a sudden it just explodes. But I imagine a database of some sort where you've got backup plans and you can call on people, and you can sort of almost have a standalone diary that kind of people will just tap into, but I understand it's tricky.
Well, yeah, exactly. We're trying a range of those different options, because at the start we were thinking, well, what we really want is we want to staff these projects with like people who are who are there for it. But then we'd find roles that really weren't appropriate to staff. So for example, if you're building a tech project, you don't need a designer all the time. You'll need a couple of hours of design at the start, a couple in a few weeks. Same with a security person. You don't need a full-time security person on your project. So we're experimenting with roles, we're calling them subject matter experts. We're experimenting with mentorship roles. We're building what's called community of practice, which is you sort of have a leader for an entire area where they vet the volunteers and they stay in touch with them and build a community where, so as an example, we brought on our engineering one. So there's, we're going to be building a community of the engineers who are for Palestine, where they can talk about engineering things, knowing that everyone is, sort of on their same team politically, that they all agree with don't kill children kind of vibe. And I think I think these sort of like they're not innovations by any means. Lots of people do this sort of thing, but I think it's going to really level up the volunteering at Tech for Palestine and for our projects.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's dive a little bit deeper on Tech for Palestine as an incubator. When did you actually become aware of the dark side of tech, and what aspects of that world do you think makes it feel not only unsurpassable but insurmountable?
Well, I would start by saying I don't think that that's insurmountable at all.
Makes me feel
tech
good.
tech got dark because a bunch of people really tried hard to make it dark. And I think that if you look at certainly the history of the modern world, the things that people try to do, they succeed at. And there's a a negative force, it's followed by a positive force, and then it's followed by a negative force, because the positive people got complacent in their post World War II bliss, for example. It's like everything's great. Well, then there's a force that comes along and ruins it. So I think it will be sort of a natural ebb and flow, and I think at the moment we're in a particularly dark part of it, because a lot of people are realizing for the first time, and I would say myself included, just how dark a lot of tech is. So when did I realize it? So this tech cycle started in 2008, maybe 2009, right after the financial crash. There was no money for a while, and there was no startups. If it had really recovered from the 2000 crash, it hadn't really taken off. So that there had been a bit of a lull, and the cycle was pretty slow. And I got in at the start of it, so I got in like 2010, 2011. So there was it was at a time where there was money, but there was not a lot of money. Not like 2018, where just anyone could get funding for any idea. You still needed a good idea, but all the good ideas weren't taken. So it was like a really nice time to get into tech. And it was a time where mobile was starting to become the major consideration. And there was, the thing that made this cycle almost was that, people had phones, and that people had, and that really everyone was on the internet now, unlike, the year 2000, where almost no one was on the internet. So you have everything becoming mobile first. So Uber is a good example, or Instacart, or DoorDash, right? You now take your taxis, your groceries, your food delivery. It's all sort of online. And they had a really nice story around it. It's like it's a sharing economy. You're driving home anyway, so why not get paid to take someone with you? How lovely!
Yeah.
Like, it works for everyone. You can share a room in your house. Just give them a little bit of breakfast and an airbed, and it's wonderful, right? And what we ended up doing was sort of financializing everything. We ended up creating a second-class citizenry, for the gig employees, and sort of the first sign that things were bad was that a lot of people in tech were for this. It's like, oh, it's a great opportunity for them to be a second-class citizen, right? It's a great opportunity for them to have to rent out a room in their house all the time because they can't afford the rent or whatever the thing. And that was kind of before it got really dark, but that I think was the first sign. Then there was the Me Too movement, and then there started being a lot of pushback against Me Too and against the DEI movement. So DEI, when it was starting in 2013, 2014, it was a lot of left-wing stuff, which I'm left-wing. I was for it. It's like, we should respect the rights of people and their preferences and how they want to live in this world and bring in their identity to work. And then you started seeing a lot of pushback to it, sort of the rise of, at the time, it was called the alt-right, which sort of took over the world. And then you started seeing the same people kind of all the time. And it's largely the PayPal mafia, right? Is Peter Thiel, David Sachs, Keith Raboy, these sort of folks started being in what's that podcast? The All In podcast, right? It's the #1 tech podcast. Or they, started funding, this is Peter Thiel again, funding companies that are just like really evil and that even have evil names. So like Palantir and Anduril, those are like, weapons companies. And they're working with the worst people. They're working to enable deportations. They're working to enable our military, being American military, to succeed in its defense objectives, which is inevitably bombing a wedding or some kids somewhere.
Defense.
Exactly. So I mean, it all started taking this really sort of like right-wing turn, and a key moment for me was the conversation in San Francisco around homelessness. So tech moved up to San Francisco after maybe starting about 2011, 2012, maybe, right? Maybe a little earlier than that, maybe. It had been in Silicon Valley, which is about 30 miles south of San Francisco, Mountain View, Palo Alto, that sort of thing. And people got priced out of Palo Alto. So they moved up to the city. It was more interesting. Everyone was young. But then started pricing people out of a lot of homes. So you got a homelessness crisis, and the visible manifestation of homelessness for most people is the most homeless. So the people who can't get into shelters, can't get into temporary housing, don't have a car, so they live on the street in tents, often with drug addictions. And people started talking about them in really dehumanizing language. You can, there's sort of like two aspects to the homeless problem. There's one problem, which is like, oh no, these people don't have anywhere to live, right? And there's the other one of like, why won't these people get away from me? They're lowering my property values. And I thought we'd have a lot more of the first, and instead we had a lot more of the second, and it used to come up all the time. And people were writing Medium posts about how San Francisco is disgusting and all these people are disgusting. And I'm like, what are you doing? Like these are humans that have to live on the street because there isn't, society has failed them. So there was a moment of light when a prosecutor named Chesa Boudin was elected, and he was one of the new cadre of sort of anti-carceral prosecutors. He had been a public defender. His parents had been in jail for almost his entire life. And he was a reformer. He got rid of cash bail. He made it about people and not about punishment. And then the tech industry got rid of him. So wow. Gary Tan, I think Jason Calacanis, Keith Raboy, all started coming out against him, started donating money to his opponents at the recall, and got him ousted. And the tech industry was generally very pro taking him down. And the conversations at that point, this is I think 2018 or 2019. It was, I mean 2020. It was real kind of like dark, real right wing, and that was the point where I was like, I'm done with this place. Like I'm done with tech. And I left San Francisco. I moved to New York because there tech would be a portion of my life rather than my entire life like it was in San Francisco.
It's really interesting. You've touched on 3 layers that are all intertwined. And the first one was that whole idea of people being stuck in a rut and tech solutions giving them almost the equivalent of that dopamine hit, where it's a quick solution to feeling exceptionally uncomfortable that you've got all these conveniences happening in your life. But actually, instead of tackling the root of the problem, which is the way that government is presiding over us, and your basic rights to exist with dignity and actually not see all your taxes being wasted instead of being spent on basic infrastructure for your health and for your education, and allow you to buy a house and not pay exorbitant amount of interest for your mortgages, etc. It's here it is. Here's a dopamine hit, if you like.
Yeah.
You can just call an Uber, or like you said, rent a space in your corridor for someone to help pay for your rent. And within the tech industry itself, people were buying into that because their experiences are no different. Just because they happen to work for one, it doesn't mean that they could see behind the curtain, if you like.
And the people in charge were incredibly pro this sort of thing, right? We're creating opportunities for these people to work. We're creating jobs. And the funny one was people were talking how Uber had created 1 million jobs, right? And in the very next sentence, they would talk about AI driving, how Uber is going to use this to cut 1 million jobs, right? They didn't say explicitly cut 1 million jobs, but they said like, oh, it's going to make driving so much cheaper. It's going to be so much better. And whether or not it's like there's a lot of reasons to indicate that it was really bad for cities, but even beyond that, like just the conversation was, we're just going to cut 1 million jobs that we were just talking about creating. And it's clear that that what it's really about is about money, and they don't really care for very much else. They in tech, it is regarded, the more money you make, the more successful you've been, because the more impact you had on the world. And they don't look at whether taking that money out was extractive or whether it was a net positive for the world. And I mean, in general, it has been a lot more extractive than positive.
Do you know what's really scary about it? And I think it's just there's that element of creating convenience, or convenient choices or options for people. And then the other element of it that you touched on was capitalizing on people's good intentions.
Well, I think one of the main concepts behind tech is that we are going to be in charge now, right? So instead of like initially there was a whole push against MBAs, right? The engineers are going to be in charge. Paul Graham, who's sort of the founding father of the current tech industry in a way, very much had this attitude of like, MBAs suck, engineers are the smartest people, we're going to do everything. And the tech industry is sort of a reflection of what happens when you have a bunch of engineers who shape everything in their image. And so like the concept was, we're going to be in charge now. We're going to do it our way. We're not going to let the government do stupid shit. And so a lot of the tech that we talked about was avoiding regulations. For Uber, for example, was just ignored regulations. It was illegal everywhere it went in until they hired lobbyists and so on to address it. And a lot of the what we're talking about earlier, that you mentioned just now with merit and DEI and this sort of thing, a lot of it was the idea that someone would tell us, the guys in charge, how to do our job, right? There's a lot of people were uncomfortable by the idea that perhaps they ended up with an all-white male tech company, that it was perhaps their fault, right? And so the idea that they launched in with like, well, it was a meritocracy, and then meritocracy got a bad name because, of course, it's bullshit. And so, they got told we need ERGs, we need people who are, diverse and representative of the population that we live in, and we need to give opportunities to, not just, white guys who went to the same universities that we went to, or from the same computer science programs that we went to. And so they really just hated being told what to do. And you could see this when Zuckerberg went on Joe Rogan, 3 or 4 weeks ago, and they said they were, they were taking away any protection against trans people. They were taking away any protection against LGBTQ, or anyone that was like, that they had designated the bad people, that, like, we were only allowing them in our society because we were forced to, and now that we're not forced to anymore, basically the mask came off.
You've incubated a wide array of tech-based projects, from media to recruitment, education, art, ad tech. Essentially, you created a home of tech for good. Which projects have you found to be, and I know it's not been going for that long, but it's incredible how much I've seen on your website since it started. Which have been the most effective in their chosen impact space, and what do you think has been the key ingredients for the success? And were there any surprises?
So I would say the main thing is almost everything is really young. So we've 43 groups at the moment. I think we're interviewing another 8 in the next week or so. There's a lot in the pipeline as well, but a lot of them are very young, right? It takes time to have impact. It takes time to be able to have, enough of a platform or enough of user base to be able to really have some sort of impact. So obviously the ones that are the most impactful are the oldest. So I'll point to Boycat as being one of the most
That's
impactful.
my chosen one.
Yeah. So I mean, that was the first one in the incubator. It existed a little bit before the incubator. I think we definitely helped them in a couple of key ways. But they now have, I think, 1.5 million users. They had maybe 25K when we started working with them.
Wow.
And so it was, if Boycat was here today, or had just started today, they would have, 25,000 users. It wouldn't be that impactful. So the projects that are starting today, are the Boycats of the future. But it takes time. I expect it'll take a year before something starting today really gets somewhere.
And which areas do you see taking off most in the next sort of 5 years, and why do you think that will be?
So one of the areas that we're sort of I don't know, inventing. I haven't heard the words before, but protest tech. So protests are going to be huge in over the next few years. Trump is just making everything protestable about, and I think people are not just angry on the left. I think it is, that anger is spreading to the right as they start to realize that they were lied to, and that they didn't vote for Elon Musk and all that sort of thing. So we have 2 major protest things at the moment. One is called Find a Protest, so findaprotest.info, where you can find the protests around you. And initially it was Palestine, but now there's a huge range of protests that people want to take part in, and very much want to expand to that use case. The other one is Jaywalk. So this is an app for protest. We haven't launched it yet, or the first version is launching soon, which will just show the protests that are around you or that are near you, so that you can attend them. But the later version will be, when you're at a protest, you can see where all the things are. You can see where the police are, counter protesters. You can get alerted if there's any violence or anything like that, so you can stay away. Alert you where the medics are, where even where the protest is moving, or where its path is, where it's going to go. Allow you to connect to organizers. And principally, what we're trying to do is we're trying to scale up people who attend protests should attend other protests, right? They should be safe at their protests. They should get to know people at the protest. So it's not just we show up at the protest, but it's we show up at the protest and then afterwards we join the movement and volunteer, get connected.
Absolutely,
and
yeah.
more protests. So yeah, that I don't know. I'm calling it protest tech. I think it's going to be a category. We have 2 things in it now. There's probably a couple more that sort of like integrate nicely in the works, and I think it's just a very exciting area.
Yeah, and it totally makes sense because the whole purpose of the protest is not to just show the government that you don't agree with a particular policy that they're implementing, but actually critically it's finding your tribe and being able to then take that to action through other subgroups with different interests and powers and sub movements, if you like. So it completely makes
Absolutely.
sense. Where do you
I mean,
find that you go ahead, sorry.
The thing is, right, protests are somewhat ineffective, right? People, the government is just not listening to protests.
Well, they just watch us. I mean, look at when 1 million people went out on the streets in London against the Iraq war, and we've been doing the same every weekend for Gaza and Palestine, and they're just cancel culture.
The government knows that it can't, or the government has learned that it can largely ignore protests and it doesn't have any impact. And so that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have protests, but it means that the purpose of a protest has to be different. It's no longer calling out to the people in power to change things. It is now calling out to the people on the sidelines to educate them, to tell them, why you need to be part of this movement, how this movement is going to affect you. So it has to be used, I think, as an organizing tool, much more so than the explicit calling out of the government, because the government is not listening. Yeah, I mean, I think I wouldn't rely on social media all that much. So social media is very much biased against us and is biased to get towards the system. They have been already they algorithmically pigeonhole us. They make sure that we're only talking to ourselves. They in particular Meta put a lot of effort into shutting down the Palestine message, shutting down a lot of people who are supporting Palestinian liberation. And so those tactics, which were used very successfully against the Palestine movement, are going to be used against every movement that's against totalitarianism, against authoritarianism, against Trump, against big tech. So we are not in a position where social media is really our friend. And they, certainly they learned from Arab Spring, where social media really did have an impact. That they need to,
contain it.
Yeah.
So we're almost existing in our own bubble now through the social media platforms, as you said, because it just doesn't have that outreach. Where have you found that you've added the most value through the support that you've provided to those startups? I know that they all probably come in with different needs, etc. But have you found that most of it has been sort of helping them develop their ideas, or is it more around technical business planning? Where has there been any kind of particular focus areas for you, particularly with it being so young and it's in the infancy of its life, both as a platform and the business ideas that are coming through?
Yeah, so I think it sort of depends on the project, but there's 3, maybe 4 main areas where we kind of support people. So one is sort of strategic help and mentorship, and a lot of that is stuff that I do personally, that I'm talking to the project. We talk about their ideas and very often it's like, this is not a good idea. I can tell you that this isn't a good idea, and here's why I don't think it's a good idea. And often that's kind of hard to hear, but it's necessary lessons. So as an example, let's talk about Find a Protest. So Find a Protest started as a site called Ceasefire Now. which did about 5 or 6 different things. And you can see that there's a bunch of these that came to us at various points. Here's some history of Palestine. Here's some information about BDS. Here's some genocidal quotes by Israel. Here's the latest news. Here's some protests near you. It's just everything, and it kind of ends up being nothing. And they only
Yeah.
have, each of them have like, only a couple hundred users a month. They're not really used by anyone. And so the advice that we gave to what was then Ceasefire Now and became Find a Protest, we went through each of these things and like, do you have any, are you really providing any value to this thing? Why is this thing here? And for them, at the time, we came to the protest tab, and it's like, well, there's a bunch of other people who do protests, so why do you even have protests here? And they said, well, actually, this group recently shut down. This group doesn't have anything up to date. And all the other ones are kind of gone. It was like, oh, well, clearly protests is a wide open, waiting for someone to do it right. And so that was where they focused. And then we helped them with, basically what they do is they have tons of volunteers who follow hundreds of Instagram channels, and they go through their lists every week, and they're like, oh, there's a protest here, and they do data entry. And that's kind of fundamentally what Find a Protest was, until they sort of built some automation, which was better at, but even then still needs a lot of humans. And so that pulled, one of the other aspects, volunteering from our community, which is one of the ways that we help. We help with launches as well. That was really helpful to a bunch of folks. News Cord and Boycat, I think, really benefited from that, because they had content that really worked really well with the kind of support that we were able to give them. So it kind of got them a boost up that they then, were able to turn into legitimate, doesn't need to be supported. Now they have much bigger platforms. Both of those have much bigger platforms than we have. And then the connections to the ecosystem. So, for example, News Cord works together with Accountable Media, and they kind of, to my knowledge, they met through us, and they got connected to sort of some other folks in that ecosystem. Boycat got connected to the BDS movement through us, and that's how they got they got to be the official BDS app, which I think was sort of kind of unthinkable a year ago, and because BDS had a sort of a traditional philosophy of here's the 10 or 15 things that you can remember, and didn't really believe in sort of these apps. And so there was negotiation and working together and so on. And so that kind of connection to the ecosystem is really helpful. And what we're doing largely is there's a movement of people who are in the sort of tech part of advocacy, and tech is so much of our world that like this is actually like really impactful. And we are connecting beyond the 40 that are in our incubator. There's hundreds of things out there, and we're helping get them connected to each other and connect to our projects and be able to sort of cross promote and cross sell. And I think it has really been I don't know whether it is that or the strategy or the marketing or the volunteers, because honestly all of them are really important.
Makes sense that you would stress test their ideas, look for gaps, look at what hasn't been done right before and how you could do it better or do it right.
Yeah.
And obviously capitalize on existing businesses and see where there's synergies, using that word again. The actual process for assessing how you're going to decide which projects you'll take on in the first place, so that's kind of taking it a step back, because it's all well and good once they get in front of you and you kind of help them, but how do you decide? You must have hundreds coming through all the time. Have you got references or any particular guidelines, regulations, etc.? Do you have a framework in place?
Sort of. Like we've tried a lot of things and been very iterative with the kind of things that we do. So there's an application form. We get about 10 applications a week, and we probably interview about 50% of them. the angle that we take is not, is this thing perfect, but rather, is there something really interesting here? Is there a reason to look at this and think this is cool? And a lot of the time it's the idea. They have spotted something, they know something in the ecosystem that we're not really aware of, or they have some expertise that we're not aware of. So very often they will be educating us about a new part of the finance industry, for example, or what exists in Palestine in terms of like ecosystem or arts or something like that could be brought to a bigger audience. And we realized that like we look at the projects that don't work, right? Of the ones that we take on, at least 20% don't work, and we try to look at why aren't they working. And one of the major things at the start was commitment. People just sort of had this idea, so now, but then didn't have the follow-up, didn't have the follow-through, same as we talked about volunteers earlier. So we now quiz them on, like, are you actually dedicated to this thing? Like, this is going to be, it's going to take years at 10, 15 as the project leader, maybe 20 hours a week for you. Is that something that you're going to be that you're going to have the capacity to do, that you're going to stick with it? So that's kind of, obviously we look at, are they bullshitting us? Like, it's not that hard to spot people who are kind of full of shit. Or like sometimes there's red flags. There's the red flags are very often, they look like all this needs is marketing and then it will succeed, right? And this is very similar to the tech industry, actually. To a lot of startups, they're either made by a non-technical person who needs engineering, or an engineering who needs, or an engineer who needs marketing support.
Marketing experts. Yeah.
Well, so they've built their app, right? They have this like full concept, full vision, and they've never done any validation. They've never talked to users. So this one is really common. And a lot of the time we'll say, look, we think there's an interesting idea here, but like, who have you talked to? Have you had conversations with the people to understand what this is for? And very often they won't understand what the thing that they're building is actually for.
Right. So it's basic market research.
Yeah.
But it's still helpful that you do that, because if the application form is designed to almost help them create a business plan that they're presenting to you, then that makes it easy for you to review. And if it's pulling up red flags, then you just flip it back and you almost say, go away and do a little bit more thinking and then come back.
Yeah, and we do that. We do that fairly often. Of the 10 we see a week, maybe 2 or 3 we're like, here, listen, here's a couple of questions that we have, and maybe we'll consider an interview if you answer them well. Or sometimes we'll just do the interview. We'll ask them the question in the interview, but the interviews are only 30 minutes, so there's a limited time to get into everything. But a lot of what we're looking for in the interview is like, are these people either capable or coachable?
I think that's the most important thing, what you said about commitment, because we could easily get excited about an idea and it's there in the moment, but the reality is so different when you are really investing in your time and effort, and you've got to be mentally prepared for setbacks. And understand that, through your eyes it might be amazing, and it might sort of give certain solutions that you see being solved straight away, but appealing to a wider audience and a bigger market is a completely different experience and reality. I watched one of your interviews where you said that the systems of venture capital, right-wing weapons manufacturer, and private equity are all interrelated with the tech companies who are either directly or indirectly funding the genocide in Palestine. Now, I would like to also add Congo and Sudan to that, by the way. It is scary, it is daunting. At the same time, there's immense hope and opportunity for change, and I believe the impact of ventures coming out of Tech for Palestine have a global reach because they educate people to help shift the false narrative that governments and the media have been feeding us in order to fund the war machine effectively. They give us the tools for action, for example, through the Boycott app, And crucially, I think they give people choices. In an age where almost all our consumption habits are based on data feeds and where divestment at a large scale is desirable, but it's effectively being blocked or delayed because of internal stooges, for want of a better expression. We don't just need to be shown the light. I think we also need viable, sustainable alternatives. And I'd personally like to be able to switch on my phone and just have a one-stop shop for all my daily needs as a consumer, which are aligned with my values. A metaverse, if you like, an alternative metaverse.
Yeah.
That is the antithesis to the one that we're forced to interface with today. Do you see that ever becoming a reality in our lifetimes? And what's your personal vision for the future of impact tech?
I mean, I think the thing to remember is that, just because the governments want it and big tech wants it and the rich and the oligarchs want it, it doesn't mean that the people want it. And the people generally do not, want to be constantly spied on, to have their resources extracted, to be part of a genocide. These aren't things that normal people want. And so we're being fed things against our will. And I think that as alternate systems develop, I think the problem is that they haven't developed, but as alternate systems develop, and I mean alternate systems of finance as well, alternate systems of funding, because there are people who have money who are on the good side and who want the best for the world and who invest according to their values, and obviously who have values. So I think it's not just a better world is possible, but it is something that is actively wanted by a lot of people, and it just didn't have the it wasn't at the forefront of what was happening over the last decade. And I think that we're in a place now where people are really wanting that sort of thing. And so as things develop, they will become that opportunity.
Yeah, it's I don't know if you've read the book by Vandana Shiva, Oneness versus the 1%.
No, I haven't.
It's one of my favorites. I absolutely love her, and it really is sort of embodies what you've just said, and I really hope that is what she says is true. It's all of us versus 1% of them.
Yeah, absolutely.
And in time it will happen. Thank you so much, Paul. I really appreciate it.